We didn't call them zombies at first, although it was obvious that's what they are. It's what they were. It's what they'd always been. Many people tried to deny their existence, because a murder goes by, no matter how grisly these days, almost unnoticed. A double homicide barely raises any eyebrows and barely even makes it to the front page these days. They just become part of our lives. The milk carton kids were replaced by walls upon walls of missing children posters in every store, but no one even looked at them. And for those who had missing children, every day was horrible. Waiting, hoping that by some miracle they'd come back, but we all knew they never would. Until the day they started coming back. Reports came flooding in that missing people, were being seen in the exact clothes they had in their missing posters. Although, some of them missing arms, legs, rib cages exposed, large parts of their heads missing. When people tried to talk to them, they did nothing. They just shambled by. It definitely looked like they knew that they wanted to go somewhere, but they didn't. If they had a destination in mind, but whether or not they even had a mind was questionable. Like I said, they just shambled endlessly in any direction. They just walked. People were terrified. People stockpiled, guns, food, water. People hid in their houses. People quit jobs. People were hiding. People were scared. But we soon learned that they didn't seem to hurt anyone. They just moved, just walked. But then, the first murders started. Seemingly at the start, it was at random. Butchers, priests, politicians, lawyers, mechanics, people from all walks of life, rich, poor, no matter what. People were getting, not devoured, not eaten, but murdered. Now, yes, there were, signs of the monsters chewing on people, but that was likely because the only weapons they seemed to have were their teeth and their claws. Now, at first, it all seemed somewhat random. Although, it was obvious that it wasn't. I mean, they wouldn't attack anyone but one specific person. And then when they did, they'd just go away. Now, it was debated for a long time, but eventually, one TV host had the right idea. It was a man who had known the loss of having a missing child almost better than anyone, for he had had one himself. He suspected that these people were coming back from the grave to take their revenge on the ones who had killed them. Once this information was out, everyone agreed. It seemed obvious because even the returned, they couldn't be provoked by violence. You couldn't get them to hurt you at all. But every time, almost every time at least, when one of them had killed someone, it was someone who was a suspect in their murder case. Sometimes the returned would find their ways into prisons and go after the ones who had killed them. They were rising from everywhere, and it seemed where they were seen coming from seemed to coincide with this theory, because it had only been the ones who had been murdered, the ones who were declared missing, were coming back. They were coming from shallow graves, from swamps, from rivers. They were coming from lakes. They were coming from cemeteries, shallow graves, and they were even coming from people's basements, just rising from the ground. Now, once everyone realized that they were only going after the ones who killed them, everyone seemed to relax. I mean, the return also, something I should say first is that people came flooding in to every nearest police station, confessing to everything, confessing to murders that had been open and shut cases, confessing to everything, confessing to rapes, confessing to murders, confessing to cases that they weren't even considered suspects in. People were confessing. Eventually, prisons were filled up. A prison seems like the only place left for someone guilty of one of these crimes, because when the returned came after you, unlike what they say in the zombie movies, a shot to the head wouldn't kill them, neither would any varying amount of brain trauma. You couldn't do anything. As long as they had an arm, a leg, a tongue, anything to just drag themselves along with, they would keep coming. Even if they were reduced to only an arm, they would keep coming. Only a leg, they'd keep coming. That leg would keep coming after you. So, like I said, it seemed like prisons were the only safe place left for the guilty. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for everyone else, but unfortunately for them, it seemed that policemen didn't try very hard to keep the return from getting into prisons. And how the return managed to get into the electrically locked cells was anyone's guess, really. But it was one day. Well, you see, everyone just kind of got used to it. Once you see something enough times, it loses its shock value. You would see them crawling across the road. People would stop and let them pass by before going again. People would take pictures with them. People would dress up as them to have fun. Whatever it was, people were actually happy. They were a better deterrent than anything. They were a better deterrent than the judicial system could ever be. Because if you were guilty, money couldn't save you. Power couldn't save you. No amount of lawyers could save you. No amount of twisting the law. If you were guilty, then they would come for you. Everyone actually started to welcome them. Until the day when that TV host I mentioned earlier, the day came where his wife, on camera, was taken down and killed by the headless, shambling corpse of her dead teenage son. The host then grabbed the gun and shot himself, and no one could blame him. No one wants to die by those things. They're brutal the way they kill. But then, questions started to raise. Was she somehow guilty for her son's death? She was never even considered a suspect. No one thought. Everyone knew her grief. Everyone knew how bad she felt, how much she hated herself for not protecting her son well enough. Everyone saw how much she freaked out. Everyone saw her grief and her guilt. So the question remained, why did the boy go after her? Eventually, there was another case of a parent getting killed. And another, an uncle, a teacher. It seemed like the returned held those who had failed to protect them accountable. So now, even if you were just the parent of one of these dead children, you were held responsible for their death because you did not protect them well enough. It happened. A lot of parents, after learning this, had taken their own lives, and who could blame them? Some welcomed them. They would stand outside, arms open, waiting for their child's last toothy embrace. Which brings to why I'm writing this. Now, for years I've wanted her to come back home. I've waited for my darling, my daughter. And now I know that she is coming. I left the back door unlocked, and I'm just sitting here in my rocking chair. I just heard the door swing open. I hear her dragging her foot, stamping with the other. I hear them moaning. And now, I'm going to stand up, turn around, and hug my daughter one last time.